This is a time when we have war on the European continent, and refusing to invest in defense, I think it's complete kind of wishful thinking.
I mean, real life's not a Marvel movie. There's no good and bad in the world.
I respectfully disagree.
I thought this was very irritating, but this is precisely the point.
Forget what you know about the usual political debate. For the 2024 European election, we are flipping the script. Voters will be at the center of the debate, and politicians will ask the questions on topics shaping the election. Like the war in Ukraine.
My name is Cathal Joyce. I'm 20 years old. I'm from Dublin, Ireland. I don't think the European Union should be preparing for a war. I think this would be mutually destructive.
My name is Tomass. I'm 27 years old. I'm from Riga, Latvia. I think, of course, Europe should be preparing for war because we already have war on the European continent, in Ukraine.
Yes or no? Are you afraid war is coming to the EU?
A few months after the Russian full-scale invasion of Ukraine, I took the decision to put my studies in the UK on hold and to move back to Latvia to undergo some military training myself because I feel a personal duty to contribute to the security and resilience of my country. We in the Baltic states, we recognize that we border two authoritarian regimes, Russia and Belarus, and I wouldn't say that we're scared, but we're certainly menaced by the range of hybrid threats, election interference, attempts to destabilize our borders, cyber attacks, and so on.
I think your concerns are commendable, and joining your own military, with the view of defending your own country is too. I believe personally, Putin, obviously it goes without saying, is a war criminal. He should be at The Hague. War isn't inevitable, and I think it's almost naive to think that a total victory can be achieved on either side, and that's why I support a ceasefire across the board.
Well, I think I empathize where you're coming from. I think that, of course, this war has brought unimaginable destruction and loss of life, but I think the sort of message of peace that you're bringing would not, in fact, lead to peace. I think Putin would use a ceasefire to basically rearm and return to war in maybe 2 or 3 or 5 years. But I think it's also wrong on moral terms. We know what happens in the occupied territories. We know about the abduction of children, rape, filtration camps, ethnic cleansing.
Yes or no? Should EU countries invest more in defense?
I don't see why the most powerful nations in the world should invest more in defence when other things are to be considered. I am from Dublin. I went to school where people were homeless. They lived in hotels. And when Ireland joined PESCO in 2017, defence spending increased 5-fold to match 2% of our GDP, but people still froze to death in the streets.
Again, I think I empathize where you're coming from. I'll maybe begin with a bit of like an anecdotal story from Latvia in the past week. There were announced plans that maybe we should finally build a proper football stadium for our national team. And our national team is terrible, but that's kind of beside the point. And so there were these debates happening that, a football stadium, it's an investment of several tens of millions of euros. And honestly, one of the main counterpoints was that this is not a time for luxuries like football stadiums. Maybe we should be building bomb shelters using these tens of millions. Of course, I would love for us to build this shiny stadium and go to games and go watch Latvia lose to Liechtenstein. But these are not normal times. This is a time when we have war on the European continent, and refusing to invest in defense while we have war and instability around our external borders, I think it's complete kind of wishful thinking and putting blinds on your eyes and hoping that the problem goes away.
The Latvian government, no offence, has issued citizenship tests to Russian-speaking people who comprise over 30% of the population. And that's been used cynically by the Russians as a stick to bash the Latvians with. I don't think, that facilitates a reduction in tensions in any way as well. We are seeing a kind of hardening of ideological lines between Russia and Europe, which I don't think is inevitable, and I don't think that should be the case.
When we have someone like Putin, a war criminal that has made threats over Europe, and when we have Trump on the other side of the Atlantic as a potential next president of the US, how do we defend peace in Europe without a coordinated European armed forces or European defense capabilities?
Taken the view away from solely the Russian invasion of Ukraine, which I think is abominable. I think the crimes of the West and the crimes of European countries, frankly, juxtapose entirely with Irish sentiments. And I think a further integration, as I see it, of the Irish military through cooperation with the European Union into this global world order, I think is morally reprehensible, just as it is to align with Russia. And that's why, fundamentally, I think Irish people should protect their own neutrality regardless of what happens, because I don't see Russia as more morally depraved than, say, Germany, who are sending arms to the Israelis and who have committed themselves to what is being alleged across the board to be a genocide. I mean, real life's not a Marvel movie. There's no good and bad in the world.
I respectfully disagree with most of what you said. I think to your question, Russia's war against Ukraine has actually further underscored the importance of all of Europe kind of being integrated under the same security umbrella. And I think an ideal example of this is the decision of Sweden and Finland, two countries with very capable armed forces, two countries with fighter jets, ships, submarines, artillery, everything. Their decision to look at the security landscape and say, you know what, we cannot deal with these threats on our own. Sweden abandoning 200 years plus of non-alignment to join the alliance. This is the ultimate sign that European countries need to work together.
Thank you. My question goes to our honourable Irish voter. Do you really believe that we should give in to nuclear blackmail from an authoritarian leader?
Well, on the flip of that, and I'm sorry to be rude and answer a question with a question, do you think tighter military coordination and military escalation on our part would in any way deter the threat of nuclear war? The British Army trained 22,000 Ukrainian soldiers prior to 2022, which ceased just before the invasion. The political reality is that Western increases of tension and Russian increases of tension complement one another across the board. That's just my contention, though.
You still didn't answer my question of whether we should give in to blackmail by nuclear powers.
Well, what you see as the alternative.
To what extent are you concerned by the risk that undersea cables reaching Ireland or satellites serving Ireland could be threatened by unfriendly forces? And do you consider that Ireland by itself could defend them? Or do you see a need for a coordinated European approach in order to defend what makes your economy work in your country?
It's a good point, and it's obviously a point of contention in Ireland. There's much discussion about it. I think hypotheticals aren't worth considering when the war has reached a stalemate in Ukraine and we've seen the return of trench warfare for the first time on the continent in over a century. There is a threat of Russian interference with our undersea cables, cyber attacks, and so on and so forth. There'll never not be a threat of that, but what's the harm in trying for a ceasefire? I mean, if you dictate all of your diplomacy on the basis of fear, where are you going to get in 20, 30, 40 years' time? Mutual distrust just breeds distrust.
Yes or no? Should the EU provide more military support to Ukraine?
I want to say, and I think the Ukrainians have the indisputable right to self-defense, And that's why it's kind of hard to, express these ideas without sounding like a Russian stooge. The Russians have held sham elections in the Donbass. They've staked their claim, and frankly, there's no telling if we can force them to leave, if anyone can force them to leave. All that's happened is corporations have made record profits while thousands of Ukrainians have been sent to the slaughter. I think we'll just send young men and women out to the firing line to be ripped up by machine guns, as has proven the case a century ago.
I think we all in Europe need to recognize that this war is not going away. We cannot treat this war as some sort of emergency, as some sort of inconvenient situation that can be frozen away, that can be localized somewhere away from our daily concerns. We see Putin openly continuing to deny the right of Ukraine to exist. Putin has just stolen another presidential term. He plans to rule until his death. Putin is expanding his repressions at home, and Putin is transitioning Russia to a wartime economy. There is no scenario where Putin says, you know what, I've had enough, send the boys home.
Your contention that Russia and Putin has spearheaded a wartime economy is correct. They've proven unsanctionable, and the weapons industry is booming, manufacture is booming. Extending the war by supplying more arms to Ukraine, which invites a necessary extension on the Russians' behalf of manufacture, I think would serve Putin, kind of ironically, in his goal to become dictator for life and to drag on the war. I think if a ceasefire is held and the Russians sink all plans to adhere to one, then go ahead, have your forever war.
But again, what basis do you have that Russians would adhere to this ceasefire? Where is any kind of shred of evidence for that when Putin is openly saying that Ukraine does not have the right to exist? Ukrainian language is a fake language. His propagandists are spouting all sorts of toxic propaganda that we in the Baltics see, redrawing maps, threatening Poland, threatening to go far beyond. So what is the backbone of this ceasefire plan?
Well, what is the backbone of drawing on the war and hoping to repel the Russians from where they've already dug themselves in? Is there any plan?
The plan is, of course, to support Ukraine in its campaigns to regain its occupied territories. This war is absolutely still winnable.
Your absolute isn't, frankly, a mode of logic. It makes a good slogan or a T-shirt or whatever, but is there any concrete plan to actually win this war? Is it actually winnable? Where's the,
I'm not a general, but Ukrainians are telling us very clearly what sort of capabilities they need, what sort of support, financial, military, they need. Again, I think it's actually your kind of very defeatist rhetoric that is actually bringing us closer to World War III.
In 2022, the Ukrainians received from the Americans weapons which exceeded the French military budget of that year. Frankly, that's an insane amount of weaponry, and nothing has come of it except slaughter. So where is the cap?
What do you mean nothing has come of it?
I mean, have the Russians left?
Are you denying the successes Ukrainians have had in holding off and staving off, not just holding off the Russian invasion, but actually reconquering more than half of the territories occupied?
Oh, big time.
Ukrainians have shown that basically we don't need European countries to send troops. We don't need anything like that. Just give us the weapons and we will get the job done. So the Ukrainians are not asking you to sacrifice anything, really. Ukrainians are just asking for weapons.
Do you think this will clear the Russians out totally and they will retreat? Putin, the strong man.
Again, I'm not a military general, but I think the war is certainly winnable if we have the courage to give the Ukrainians what they need.
But you said that twice.
Sorry, just let me finish.
Go ahead.
We've gone through several cycles of this kind of very kind of one-sided self-deterrence that you are promoting. So if you remember at the beginning, there were talks that no, we can't send any weapons to Ukraine. Like, we can't send javelins, because if a Western javelin is used to shoot down a Russian helicopter, then we will have World War III, right? Then Russians will nuke or something like that. Then we went through the same thing with artillery, HIMARS. No, this is the red line when Russians will nuke us. Then we went through this with tanks. Now we're going through it with jets. Now we'll have the debate on long-range missiles, right? So every time we keep going through this kind of delayed self-deterrence that is only actually prolonging the war. If we'd given the Ukrainians more capabilities faster, they would have had greater success by now.
Say hypothetically that ceasefire is reached and the negotiations start. What kind of a signal would it send to Russia and Putin, the dictator as he is? You believe that there might be a way forward in this, or isn't there a risk that he sees it as a green card to act like he has doing also in other countries?
It's a thinly veiled kind of invocation of strongman politics. Don't back down, don't look weak. If we consider, our pride and our feelings ahead of, the lives of millions, frankly, I think it's irrational. And I think we're talking, frankly, and I know I sound insane, like the destruction of the human race. So I don't really care about what message, whatever sends. That's just me, though.
No, I think the scenario you're describing would send a devastating signal. I think it's kind of like Chamberlain coming home after the Munich conference, where parts of Czechoslovakia are given away to Hitler, and he's waving this piece of paper saying, "Oh, I have brought peace to Europe." So I think that if this sort of ceasefire agreement is reached, then it sends the signal to Putin that his ambitions have been rewarded, that there is potential for more, that the Europeans are kind of, locked into this tunnel vision of seeking dialogue, even with a genocidal dictator.
The Nazi analogy is frankly a bad faith one, because it's, I think, morally reprehensible to take sort of, the only war ever fought in human history between abject evil and good, and apply that to what's currently happening now. This is more inclined, I'd be more inclined to believe this is more like World War I, where warring imperialist powers are facing off against each other in a show of strength in order to reshuffle the global economy.
Where I do have a question is whether it is possible to drive a progressive agenda and at the same time not being able to fight against colonial and imperial power, which is right at our border or at the border of some of our nations, and whether it is possible to drive a progressive agenda in Ukraine, which I wish this country very much, while this country will be divided and will be threatened by yet another round, if we are not doing something to project some power or deterrence vis-à-vis Russia. There will be obviously another round of imperial ambitions by Russia. So don't you think that these two visions contradict to each other?
Possibly. What I will tell you is, if things continue the way they've been going, there will be no progressive reality in Ukraine. Zelensky has banned certain opposition parties, allegedly pro-Russian, but he doesn't define the rules. And on the Green Front, I suppose, what's more destructive than war? The US military is the largest institutional polluter in this world, more so than any other military, and they're giving, millions upon millions upon millions upon millions of weapons and so on to the Ukrainians.
What about Russia committing ecocide, destroying dams, mining agricultural land, threatening Zaporizhia nuclear power plant, putting literally all of Europe's security at risk? What about Russia's destructive
You're not wrong, pal.
actions?
I'm there with you all the way. How do you stop that? You don't prolong the war.
What is your request, really, from political parties and media? How to even have this emotionally loaded, paradigmatic conversation?
It's between the Ukrainians and the Russians. I think it should be mediated. obviously. I don't think it's up to the European Union to decide what the terms of the ceasefire are. It's not within our borders.
I think in the next kind of political term, two clear signals need to be sent, not just in rhetoric, but in practice. One is that Europe is serious about becoming a security and defense actor. And the second signal is to Ukraine, not just rhetoric and summits and handshaking, but clear actions that suggest that you are serious about including Ukraine in the European Union. And this means you doing the work to reform the EU so that it is ready to accept new member states, also Moldova and Bosnia and maybe some other ones. But this is something that Putin really will understand. If Europeans are serious about helping Ukraine defend itself, but also serious about its place within Europe.
Yes or no? Would you risk your life for Europe?
Would I risk my life for Europe? I answered this question with respect to my own country, Latvia, and I think it's kind of foolish to treat these two as indivisible. Latvia is Europe. We're not some sort of marginal peripheral actor. We're not some sort of second tier or a new member state. We are Europe proper. So that would be my answer.
I think Europe as a monolithic idea is a novel one, and it's an ideological concept. For centuries, Europeans slaughtered each other, and that's one of the good things the EU has brought about, is that it's ended this. But the idea of dying for Europe, dying for anything without context, it's dying for banal nationalism, if you want to call it that, or just for the idea of self-defense without giving any context as to what I'd be dying for. I think is a bit of a silly question. Irish people, frankly, are the only Europeans to have experienced colonialism. We're not the only Europeans who have. Russian imperialism is quite different. Ireland was an extractive colony for years. Irish agriculture fed, the British working class during the Industrial Revolution, so on and so forth. When I go to my grandfather's village in the west of Ireland, I see, houses that were emptied during the famine of the 1800s. And I can personally, we can talk about Russia till the cows come home. I think there's more pressing humanitarian crises in the world. I think Europe as an idea, dying for Europe, I think it's, away with the fairies, frankly, as we say in Ireland.
But look, my point is not that Ukraine is the only crisis or war in the world. Mm-hmm. Absolutely not. But I think what you're saying is some sort of, false choice. Europe should be a superpower. Europe should be able to walk and chew its gum. We do not have to choose between, committing our resources to address one humanitarian issue and the other.
I thought this was very irritating, but this is precisely the point. Hearing on the panel views by both was very important, because this reflects the ambivalences and the tensions that we have in our voting population.
Well, it was actually super interesting. I think for people who are used to talk a lot, it's, I think, a challenge to shut up a bit and to be able to listen to two completely opposite views who are from two very different reality as well, was extremely interesting.
It's an unusual format to actually flip the script. That politicians are listening carefully to what voters have to say. I certainly agreed with what the Latvian young voter had to say, whereas I do very sharply disagree with a lot of statements the young Irish voter made.
Congratulations, it's fascinating. This is exactly what political debates need. So this is very important that we continue the conversation around how courageous politicians can put on the agenda new vision for how to make sure the citizens feel safe and they're truly supported by Europe, regardless of what our international global partners decide to do in the future.
I think it's an intriguing format. I think for us as politicians, as elected politicians, this kind of format helps to sharpen our own focus. The premise put forward by the Irish voter that the road to or the path to world peace goes through giving the aggressor what he wants is wrong as it is dangerous.
And I would have liked to hear as well a bit of a feminist perspective in this debate, because in terms of defense, I think we tend to only think about military and not only about everything which is around. I think emphasized a lot with the Irish citizens that was talking, because I think I'm coming from the same perspective as he is at the beginning, but the Ukrainian crisis was a switch in the way I thought about this kind of things.
I find that even though there are divergent views on how to achieve peace, we see that, for example, for someone in Latvia that has a closer understanding of what this aggression means to Europe, we should have the EU standing for Europe rather than depending on decisions made in Germany and France.